I was exhausted. It had been hours of driving on this endless highway, no cars in sight for miles. The gas station I stopped at earlier warned me there wasn't much around, but I hadn't expected this kind of isolation. When I finally saw the dim, flickering motel sign in the distance, it felt like a small victory. I just needed a bed, somewhere to sleep for a few hours before I got back on the road. The motel was run down, paint chipped off the walls, and the neon sign buzzed like it was struggling to stay alive. But it was a place to crash, and I wasn't picky. The manager stood behind the desk, smiling. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. I told myself I was overthinking it, just tired. His words were polite, but something about the way he said, "You'll be very comfortable here," made my skin crawl a bit. Still, I handed him cash, got the key, and made my way to room 9. The hallway was eerily quiet. No other guests seemed to be around. The whole place felt abandoned, like it had been forgotten a long time ago. I shoved that thought aside and stepped inside my room. It looked like every other cheap motel room I'd ever stayed in. Old furniture, a bed that creaked when I sat on it, and the faint smell of mold. I tossed my bag on the floor, sat on the bed for a moment, then stood up to fix a crooked picture on the wall. That's when I saw it. A tiny hole, just behind the frame, like a small lens was hidden there. At first, I didn't believe it. No way, right? I moved closer, squinting at the hole. The more I stared, the more certain I became. It was a camera, hidden behind the picture. My heart started pounding. My throat felt dry. What the hell? I began tearing the room apart. I pulled at the lamp, flipped the pillows, dug through drawers. It didn't take long before I found another camera, this one behind a vent in the ceiling. I kept going, panic setting in. Cameras. There were cameras everywhere, in the clock, behind the TV, even tucked into a corner of the bathroom mirror. I felt sick. My stomach churned, and I stumbled back, staring at the room as if it were a trap. That's exactly what it was. A trap. I rushed out of the room, barely thinking. My feet carried me down the hall, my mind racing. I had to confront the manager. This was insane. When I got to the front desk, he was already there, like he knew I was coming. His face didn't change, just that same unnerving smile. I demanded to know what was going on, told him about the cameras. His expression didn't shift. He shrugged, gave some weak excuse about security measures. He said it so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. But the way he looked at me, like he was daring me to argue more, made me feel like I was walking into something much worse than hidden cameras. He watched me closely, his gaze too steady, too knowing. I backed away slowly, his eyes following me, and I hurried back to my room. I wanted to leave, but I needed my things. As I packed up, I heard it. A faint sound, like scratching or dragging. It came from the next room. I froze, listening. Someone, or something, was moving. I went to the door and leaned in, and pressing my ear against it. The noise grew louder, and I swear I heard whispers, like people trying to talk quietly. I knocked on the door next to mine. No answer. I knocked again, harder this time. Silence. I tried the knob. It was unlocked. The room was empty. It looked just like mine, only colder, darker. There were no signs anyone had been staying there recently, but the sound, it had been so clear. I glanced around and noticed the nightstand drawer slightly open. Inside, I found a notebook, old and worn. The pages were filled with names, dozens of them, all written in shaky handwriting, and one by one each name was crossed out. My name was at the bottom. I felt my pulse in my ears. I needed to leave, now. I ran back to my room, grabbed my stuff, and raced to the exit, but the door to the outside wouldn't open. I yanked at it, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind me. Slow, deliberate. I turned and saw him, the manager. His smile was gone. In his hand, he held a knife, casually twirling it as if deciding what to do next. "You're not leaving," he said softly, his voice calm, too calm. I didn't think. I grabbed a chair from the lobby and threw it at the window, shattering the glass. He lunged at me, but I ducked, scrambling through the broken window and onto the parking lot. I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. My legs ached and my lungs burned, but I couldn't stop, not yet. I waved down the first car I saw. A black sedan pulled over and I jumped inside, barely able to speak. The driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, concern in his eyes. He asked if I was okay, if I needed to go to the police. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. That's when I recognized him. The driver. He was the man who checked in earlier, the one I passed on the way to my room. The blood drained from my face as I looked closer. He smiled at me in the mirror, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I think I'm still trapped. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, just me and Laura, driving through the middle of nowhere, trying to get some peace. We'd been fighting a lot lately, so I thought a break from the city might help. We didn't plan for the car to break down, though. It sputtered and coughed, finally giving up when we were in the middle of some desolate highway. No phone signal, no help. We spotted a small motel on the side of the road just as the sun was setting. The sign flickered, casting a weak yellow light across the parking lot. It didn't look like anyone else was staying there. I remember saying to Laura, "This place feels wrong." She didn't respond, just stared at the place with a worried expression. The man at the front desk seemed odd. His eyes barely met ours when we checked in. He gave us a key without a word, his hand trembling slightly. When I asked him if there was anyone who could help with our car, he shrugged. "No mechanic around here this time of night. Stay till morning, I guess." His voice was cold, flat, like he didn't care. The room wasn't much better. The walls were stained. The bed looked like it hadn't been cleaned in weeks, but we were too tired to complain. I thought maybe things would feel better after some sleep. I was wrong. Around midnight, we started hearing noises. Loud bangs like someone dragging furniture or slamming doors. It came from the room above us. At first I tried to ignore it, figuring it was another guest being careless. But it went on for hours, constant pounding. And it wasn't just furniture. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Laura looked at me, wide-eyed. "There's no one else here, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll go ask the manager," I said, trying to sound calm even though my stomach felt tight. When I knocked on the front desk, the manager took a while to answer. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes. "There's someone upstairs, making a lot of noise," I told him. His reaction was strange. He just stared at me, then shook his head slowly. "No one's up there," he said. "You two are the only ones here tonight." "But we heard—" "It's an old building. It makes sounds," he cut me off, like he'd said this 100 times before. "Go back to your room." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and left. When I got back to the room, I told Laura what he said, but neither of us believed it. The banging hadn't stopped. As the night dragged on, things got worse. We started hearing more than just banging. There were whispers outside our door, like someone talking, but too quiet to make out. I got up several times to check the hallway, but it was always empty. The feeling of being watched crept over me, and it was making both of us jumpy. Laura wanted to leave, but where could we go? Our car was dead, and the manager didn't seem like he was going to help. The next morning, when the sun finally came up, I stepped outside to get some air. That's when I saw the police tape. It wasn't there last night. It was wrapped around one of the rooms on the other side of the parking lot. My chest tightened. I went back inside, trying to keep my voice steady as I told Laura what I saw. We decided to confront the manager again. I asked him about the police tape. He looked more nervous than before, scratching at his arm like it itched. "Old incident," he said, eyes darting away. "Nothing to worry about now." His words didn't sit right with me, but before I could ask more, he disappeared into a back room. Something was very wrong. I pulled out my phone and somehow managed to get a weak signal. A quick search told us what we feared. There had been a murder at the motel just a few days ago. The last guests in our room were found dead, brutally killed. And the worst part? The killer was still on the loose. It all clicked into place then. The banging, the whispers, the way the manager seemed to brush everything off. I felt sick. The person who killed them could still be here. What if he never left? We packed up as fast as we could and ran to the car. Of course, it still wouldn't start. Panic set in as Laura frantically tried to call for help, but the signal was too weak. I thought about going back to the front desk to demand help, but when we got there, the manager was gone. His office was dark, the door left ajar. Then, the lights in the motel flickered out. We stood there, frozen. The banging started again, louder than ever. This time, it wasn't coming from the room above. It was coming from right behind us. I grabbed Laura's hand, pulling her toward the exit. The banging got closer, faster. We sprinted for the door, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was right behind us, about to reach out and grab us. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The last thing I remember before we burst through the front door and into the cold air was Laura whispering, "Do you think we're next?" We never found out who was making the noises that night. We got out alive, but that motel? It's burned into my memory. I don't know what happened to the manager or if they ever caught the killer, but sometimes, late at night, I can still hear those bangs in my head, and I wonder if we were really alone in that room. I didn't even notice the name of the motel. I was just desperate to get off the road. I had been driving for hours, maybe even days. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my eyes too dry to blink. When I saw the vacancy sign flickering in the distance, I pulled over without thinking. All I wanted was to sleep. The receptionist smiled as I walked in. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, but I didn't care. I didn't even bother to read the sign-in sheet she handed me. My head was spinning, and I just needed a bed. She gave me a key and pointed me down the hall, her eyes following me longer than they should have, but I brushed it off. I was too tired to care about anything. The room was plain, nothing special. A bed, a small TV, a window that faced an empty parking lot. I threw my bag on the floor and collapsed on the bed. My mind raced for a few minutes, thoughts of where I'd been, and what I was running from flashing in and out. But soon, the exhaustion won, and I passed out. I woke up the next morning feeling a little better, but still on edge. I packed my bag quickly, ready to get back on the road. I didn't want to stay any longer than I had to. I locked the door behind me and walked to the exit. That's when things got strange. I pushed open the door to the lobby, and there she was again. The receptionist, sitting behind the desk with the same blank smile. For a moment, I was confused. Maybe I had walked the wrong way. I turned back down the hall and retraced my steps, but no, that was the only exit. I tried again, pushing through the door to the lobby. There she was again, smiling at me like I had never left. I laughed nervously, thinking it was just a mistake. Maybe I was more tired than I thought, but when I tried a third time, my stomach started to churn. Every time, no matter which direction I took, I ended up back at the front desk, her smile the only constant thing in this nightmare. Panic started to creep in. I pushed open every door I could find, a storage closet, a maintenance room, even the kitchen, but none of them led outside. Every window I tried was sealed shut, and no matter what I did, I couldn't open them. The walls seemed to close in on me as I made my way back to the lobby once more. I approached the desk, my voice shaking, asking her what was going on. She smiled and told me, "It's just how it is." Her tone was flat, like she had said those words 100 times before. I demanded to know how to get out, but she just repeated herself, like a broken record, her smile never fading. Something was wrong with her. Her movements were too smooth, too rehearsed. It was like she wasn't even a real person. I felt like I was talking to a doll, one with eyes that watched every move I made. My head throbbed as I kept trying to find some sense in all of this, but nothing added up. I noticed things then, things that I hadn't seen before. The clock on the wall wasn't moving. The paintings on the walls were the same in every hallway. There were no cars in the parking lot outside, no signs of life anywhere. It was like the motel existed only for me, and the thought sent a cold chill down my spine. Frustrated, I began to search the room, looking for anything that might help me understand. I found old newspapers stuffed in a drawer behind the front desk. The dates didn't make sense. Some were from decades ago, but they looked brand new. My hands trembled as I read through them. Stories of missing people, names I didn't recognize, but something about them felt familiar, like they had been here too. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded as I backed away from the desk, my eyes locking onto the receptionist again. She tilted her head, watching me with that same empty smile. It felt like she was mocking me, like she knew something I didn't. Desperation took over. I grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her, demanding answers. Her smile never faltered. She finally spoke, her voice low and chilling. "People like you never leave." Her words echoed in my head, and suddenly it all made sense. This wasn't about the motel. It wasn't the walls trapping me here. It was me. I had done something I was trying to forget, something I was running from, and now this place wouldn't let me go until I faced it. I staggered back, the memory hitting me all at once, the car, the crash, the blood. I had been running from it for so long I thought I could escape it, but here in this empty motel, it had finally caught up to me. I ran as fast as I could, through every hallway, every door, trying to find a way out. But it didn't matter. No matter where I went, I ended up back at the front desk, her smile waiting for me. I screamed. I begged. But deep down, I knew. There was no escape. Not from this place. Not from myself. The last thing I remember is checking back in, the pen heavy in my hand as I signed my name again. The receptionist smiled, as if nothing had happened, and I realized it was always going to end like this. I don't even know where to start, but I feel like I need to share this, even if no one believes me. Last weekend, I was driving back from a work trip. It was late, and I was exhausted. I had been on the road for hours, and my eyes felt heavy. I kept telling myself I'd push through, but when I saw the old motel on the side of the road, I figured I'd better stop, just for a few hours of sleep. Big mistake. The place looked run down, like it hadn't been properly cared for in years. The lights flickered, and the paint on the walls was peeling. But all I cared about was finding a bed. Inside, there was a man behind the counter. He looked tired, like he didn't want to be there any more than I did. Without really making eye contact, he handed me a key, room 39. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just wanted to sleep. When I asked him where the room was, he mumbled something I couldn't understand, then walked away before I could ask again. I thought that was weird, but I figured I could find the room myself. I checked the map on the wall behind me, but there was no room 39. I even looked twice. Nothing. I stood there, confused, but too tired to care much. The hallways were dim, with old yellowish lights. I dragged my suitcase down, looking for numbers on the doors. 35, 36, 37. but when I reached the end of the hall, there was no room 39. I turned around, ready to go back and complain, when I noticed something odd. There was a door at the very end of a small corridor I hadn't seen before. No number on it, but the key in my hand somehow felt like it belonged there. I hesitated for a moment. There was something off about that door, something that made my skin crawl, but exhaustion pushed me forward. I put the key in and it clicked. The room was dark when I walked in, but when I turned on the light, it was strange. Everything looked old, yet clean. Too clean, like it had been frozen in time. There was a heavy smell in the air, something stale, like the place hadn't been touched in years. I felt uneasy, but I told myself I was just tired and imagining things. I locked the door and went to bed. That night, I barely slept. At first, it was just small noises, scratching, soft whispers I couldn't quite hear. I thought maybe it was someone in the next room, but after a while, I realized something. There was no next room. The layout of the motel didn't allow for one. That's when I started hearing something more. It was faint, but there was crying. I sat up in bed, listening, my heart pounding. Where was it coming from? I tried to shake it off, but as I walked around the room, I noticed something else, marks on the walls. Faint, but definitely there, like something had been dragged across the floor. My stomach turned. I suddenly felt very, very wrong being in that room. I wanted to leave right then, but I convinced myself to wait until morning. First thing in the morning, I went straight to the front desk. The man from the night before was gone, replaced by a woman who seemed friendlier. I told her I wanted to check out, but when I mentioned room 39, her face went pale. She told me there was no room 39. I insisted that I had just spent the night there, but she wouldn't hear it. She kept saying I must be confused, that room 39 didn't exist. I was about to leave when I noticed one of the cleaning ladies. She was older, seemed like she'd been working there forever. I asked her about the room. At first, she didn't want to say anything, but then she whispered to me, "Bad things happened in that room. Years ago, a family stayed there. They were killed by the old owner. He tried to cover it up, sealed off the room. Officially, it never existed." I felt sick. I didn't believe her at first, but I couldn't shake the feeling I had in that room. I rushed back to pack my things, but as soon as I entered the room again, it felt even worse. The air was thick, like something heavy was pressing down on me. I tried to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I started to panic. The more I pulled, the more I felt like I was trapped. I looked around the room and noticed a section of the wall that looked wrong, like it had been patched up. Desperate, I grabbed a chair and started hitting the wall. It broke apart quicker than I thought, revealing a hidden space behind it. My heart stopped when I saw what was inside. There were old, blood-stained clothes, toys, a suitcase, all covered in dust. There was no question. This was from the family the maid had talked about. I ran out of the room as soon as the door opened, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't stop to talk to anyone. I didn't even check out. I just got in my car and drove. As I left the motel behind, I looked in my rearview mirror. The place seemed to shrink, like it was disappearing. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that somehow the motel was more than just a place. It was hiding something. I tried looking it up later, but there was no record of it, no stories about murders, no mention of a room 39. It was like it had all been erased. Now, I'm left wondering if any of it was real. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I'm not going back. I've worked at this old, dingy motel for 2 years now. It's the kind of place where people stop for a night when they're too tired to drive any further. Cheap rooms, peeling paint on the walls, and a broken ice machine that nobody bothers to fix. The manager, Mr. Carter, never says much. He just keeps to himself, watching everyone with those cold eyes of his. Sometimes, I wonder why he stays here. But then again, I guess I'm no different. Most days, it's the same routine. Change the sheets, scrub the bathrooms, vacuum the carpets. Nothing exciting. Until today. I had just finished cleaning room 204 when I got to 206. The door was unlocked, which was strange because the guests had checked out that morning. I pushed it open, and the smell hit me right away. Like metal, but sharper, more bitter. It was faint, but unmistakable. I wrinkled my nose and stepped inside. At first glance, the room looked normal. Bed unmade, towels piled in the corner, TV still on but muted. I went to turn off the TV when I noticed something on the bed. A large, dark stain. My heart jumped a little. It wasn't just a coffee spill or something harmless. It looked like blood. I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. I told myself it could be anything else, but I knew better. I'd seen blood before, just never this much. My hand shook as I pulled back the comforter, revealing a massive dried stain on the sheets underneath. Panic started creeping in, but I forced myself to keep moving. Maybe it was old, maybe the person was hurt and got help. That's what I told myself. Then I saw the phone. It was lying on the floor, smashed like someone had stomped on it. I picked it up, but it was completely destroyed. The screen shattered, the back cracked open. Nearby, a few personal items were scattered, an earring, some loose change, and a crumpled piece of paper with a phone number on it. It was like whoever was here left in a hurry, or worse, didn't leave by choice. I couldn't breathe properly. My mind raced with questions. Should I call the police? Should I tell Mr. Carter? But what if it was nothing? I didn't want to make a big deal out of it and look stupid. I took a deep breath and kept cleaning, or at least pretended to. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more I realized something bad had happened in that room. I glanced at the door. I needed to get out of there, fast. I decided I'd call the police, anonymously maybe. I didn't want to get involved, but I couldn't just leave this. Someone could still be in danger. As I grabbed my things and headed toward the front office, I saw Mr. Carter standing by the front desk. He looked up as I approached, his expression as blank as ever. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel the sweat starting to form on my forehead. He asked how the cleaning was going, his voice casual, but there was something off. It felt like he knew exactly what I had found in room 206. I stammered something about being done soon and tried to leave, but he didn't move. His eyes were fixed on me, and for a moment I thought about telling him. But then, as if reading my mind, he said, "Room's all clean? No problems?" There was something in his tone, something that made my stomach turn. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. I felt my throat tighten. He knew. I mumbled a quick, "Yeah, all good," and walked out of the office as fast as I could. My legs felt weak, but I pushed through, heading for my car parked around the side of the building. I needed to get out of there and call the police. I was sure of it now. Something terrible had happened, and Mr. Carter was involved. I could feel his eyes on me even though I wasn't in the room with him anymore. As I reached the parking lot, my heart sank. There, leaning against my car, was Mr. Carter. He had moved so fast, it was like he knew where I was headed. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable. I felt trapped. He gave me a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. I tried to act normal, my mind scrambling for a way out. "Forgot something inside," I said, turning back toward the motel. My pulse raced. I needed to think, to come up with a plan. I couldn't let him know I was scared, but I was terrified. Every step back toward the building felt like I was walking into a trap. I rushed back into the motel, heading for the staff room. There was a back exit there, one I could use to slip out without him seeing. My hands fumbled as I tried to unlock the door, the keys slipping from my grip. As I bent down to pick them up, I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. Footsteps. Slow, steady footsteps coming down the hall. He was coming for me. My breath caught in my throat, my hands shaking as I finally got the door open. I slipped outside, my heart pounding in my ears. I ran toward the highway, my legs barely carrying me. I didn't stop until I reached the gas station down the road, my body trembling as I called the police from the payphone. I don't know if they believed me. By the time they got to the motel, Mr. Carter was gone. Room 206 was spotless, not a trace of the blood stain or the broken phone. They said I must have imagined it, that I was tired and overworked, but I know what I saw, and I know Mr. Carter is still out there, watching, waiting. So, I don't really know what happened. I'm still trying to piece it together, but it doesn't make sense. Maybe you guys can help me figure this out. Last week, I had a work trip. It was a last-minute thing, just a quick meeting in a town about 6 hours away from where I live. I was too tired to drive all the way back after the meeting, so I booked a room at this small roadside motel I found online. It wasn't fancy, but it looked clean enough in the pictures, and the price was cheap. I arrived late, around 9 p.m. The place was pretty much in the middle of nowhere, a narrow highway, no street lights, and barely any cars, just dark, empty fields on both sides. The motel looked old, like something out of the 70s, but it was quiet, which is all I cared about. When I got to the front desk, there was a guy behind the counter, maybe in his 50s. He didn't say much, just gave me a room key after checking my ID and credit card. He looked tired, or maybe just bored, but he wasn't rude or anything. The room was basic. Bed, TV, a small table. It was fine. I was too exhausted to care about anything else. I remember locking the door, closing the curtains, and passing out almost right away. When I woke up the next morning, something felt wrong. It wasn't anything I could explain, just this strange feeling in my gut. I figured maybe I was just groggy from the long drive, but as I got dressed, I realized it was too quiet. No sound of cars outside, no people walking around, nothing. I went to the front desk to check out, but there was no one there. I called out, but the lobby was completely empty. I noticed something strange. It didn't look like it did last night. The furniture was covered in dust, like nobody had touched it in years. I was sure the lobby had been clean when I checked in, but now it looked like it hadn't been used in ages. There were even cobwebs in the corners. I thought maybe the guy just left for a minute or something, so I stepped outside to get some air and look around. That's when I realized there were no other cars in the parking lot. Not one. It was empty except for my car. In all the motel rooms, there were no signs of life, no lights on, no sounds coming from inside. Every door was closed, just like it was abandoned. My mind was racing. How could this be? I checked in, talked to the guy at the front desk, went to sleep. This place couldn't be abandoned. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they closed early for some reason. Maybe the other guests left super early. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. I decided to walk around the motel, hoping to find someone, anyone. I knocked on a few doors, but there was no answer. The more I looked, the worse the place seemed. It wasn't just empty, it was decaying. The windows were covered in grime, the paint peeling, and the pool out back was filled with dirty rainwater and leaves. That's when I started to feel really uneasy. I went back to the lobby, hoping to find some kind of clue, and that's when I saw the papers. They were old newspapers and documents, just lying on the counter in the manager's office. I flipped through them, and my stomach dropped. The most recent newspaper was from 5 years ago. One of the documents was a police report. It mentioned something about crimes happening at the motel, a string of break-ins, people going missing. The last report said the place was shut down after an investigation. I felt cold. There was no way the motel should have been open. How did I check in last night? Who was the guy behind the desk? Panic hit me. I ran to my car, but of course, it wouldn't start. I tried my phone. No signal. I was stuck. Alone. In this dead, forgotten place. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was dreaming. Maybe I had imagined everything. I even started to doubt myself, thinking I had hallucinated the whole check-in process. But no, I remembered too clearly. The man's tired face, the sound of the door closing behind me, the feel of the bed as I collapsed into it. By afternoon, I was pacing back and forth in my room trying to figure out what to do. Should I walk down the highway and hope someone drives by? Should I stay put? The silence was crushing me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, but there was no one there. As the sun began to set, things got worse. The shadows outside stretched long across the parking lot, and I swore I saw movement in the corner of my eye. But when I looked, there was nothing, just empty, dusty rooms. I locked myself in my room again, trying to calm down, but the anxiety only grew. And then, just as night fell, the lights in the motel flickered on. Every single room lit up, just like it had been last night when I arrived. The buzzing of the old neon sign outside started again. The one I hadn't even noticed wasn't working earlier. And then I heard it. A voice. From the front desk. It called my name, just like it did when I checked in. But this time, I knew no one was there. I haven't been able to sleep since then. I don't know what happened. I left as soon as the sun came up, just walked down the highway until a truck driver picked me up. He told me the motel had been abandoned for years. Now, I don't know what's real. Was I ever really there? Did I ever really leave? The last motel. Hey everyone, I need to share something really strange that happened to me last week. It's been gnawing at me, and I don't know who else to turn to. Maybe someone here has an idea of what could have happened. So, last week, I had to go on a work trip. It was a last-minute thing, an important meeting 6 hours away from home. I was exhausted by the time it was over. I decided to stay the night rather than drive back. I found this small, roadside motel online. The pictures made it look decent enough, and the price was right. I arrived at the motel around 9 p.m. It was in the middle of nowhere, no street lights, just dark fields stretching on both sides. The motel looked old, like from the 70s or something, but it was quiet. I was too tired to care about the decor. When I got to the front desk, there was a man behind it. He looked to be in his 50s, with tired eyes and a gruff demeanor. He barely spoke, just checked my ID, handed me a room key, and said, "Have a good night." His voice sounded drained, like he'd been doing this job for too long. The room was basic. Bed, tea, a small table. I locked the door, pulled the curtain shut, and collapsed into bed. I was out almost immediately. The next morning, I woke up with a strange feeling. Something was off. At first, I thought it was just grogginess from lack of sleep. But as I got ready, I realized how silent it was. There were no sounds of traffic, no people outside. I went to the front desk to check out, but the lobby was empty. I called out, but no one answered. The place looked different than the night before. The furniture was covered in dust, and there were cobwebs in the corners. I was sure it had been cleaned the night before. I stepped outside, hoping to get some fresh air and figure things out. The parking lot was completely empty except for my car. There were no other cars, and all the rooms were dark and silent. The place looked abandoned. The windows were grimy, the paint was peeling, and the pool out back was filled with dirty rainwater and leaves. I started to panic. I knocked on a few doors, but there was no response. The motel felt like it had been deserted for years. I went back to the lobby, searching for answers. That's when I saw them. Old newspapers and documents scattered on the counter. The most recent newspaper was from 5 years ago. There was also a police report about the motel being shut down after a series of crimes. People had gone missing, and the place had been closed after an investigation. My heart raced. How could this place be abandoned? I had checked in, and the man at the front desk had seemed real. What was going on? I ran to my car, but it wouldn't start. I tried my phone, but there was no signal. I was stuck. The silence around me was crushing. It felt like something was watching me, but I was alone. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to think of what to do. Should I walk down the highway and hope someone comes by? Should I stay put and wait for help? The silence was unbearable. I felt like I was losing my mind. As the sun began to set, things got even stranger. The lights in the motel flickered on. Every single room lit up, just like it had been the night before. The neon sign outside buzzed back to life. I heard a voice from the front desk calling my name. It sounded just like the man who checked me in, but no one was there. I was terrified. I locked myself in my room again, trying to stay calm, but the anxiety was overwhelming. The shadows outside grew long and twisted, and I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked, but there was nothing. Just the empty, dusty rooms. I couldn't stay in the room. I needed to get out. I paced back and forth, trying to think clearly, but the dread was suffocating. I felt trapped in a nightmare. Just before dawn, I decided to leave. I walked down the highway, hoping someone would find me. After a few hours, a truck driver picked me up. He told me the motel had been abandoned for years. Now, I don't know what's real. Did I really stay at that motel? Did I ever leave? Was it all just a bad dream or some weird psychological trick? I can't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I don't know what happened, but it feels like I was caught in something that shouldn't exist. I just hope I never have to find out again. I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. I was shaking when I stepped into the tiny motel, my backpack slung over my shoulder, my eyes darting to every shadow. My whole life felt like it was falling apart. I had finally run away, leaving behind him and all the things he did to me. I didn't care where I ended up, as long as it was far from him. The motel was small, hidden away on a quiet road that almost no one used. The owner, a man in his 50s, stood behind the counter, watching me with a strange smile as I asked for a room. His smile didn't feel right, but I told myself I was just being paranoid after everything. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. But he nodded, took my cash without asking too many questions, and gave me the key to room 12. "This is a quiet place," he said, his voice low. "No one comes here much. You'll be safe." His words made me feel a little better. Safe. That was all I wanted. That night, though, something woke me up. It was a low, strange sound, like something being dragged across the floor. It came from below, deep beneath my room. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, listening as it grew louder and then stopped. Silence filled the room, and I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the old building settling, or maybe I was just so used to waking up to fear that I was imagining things. I forced myself to lie back down, trying to relax, but sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, I mentioned the noise to the owner. He gave me that same strange smile, the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "Just the pipes," he said. "Old building. They make all kinds of sounds." I nodded, pretending to believe him, but something felt wrong. His smile, his words, the way his eyes didn't look at mine when he spoke, it all made me uneasy. But I pushed it down. I couldn't leave. I had nowhere else to go. Over the next couple of days, I noticed more strange things. The owner seemed to always be watching me, though he tried to act casual about it. Whenever I passed by the door that led to the basement, I felt an urge to open it, but it was always locked. And I kept hearing those noises at night, scraping, dragging, sometimes even soft thumps. But every time I asked the owner, he just shrugged and gave me the same excuse. Pipes. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. My curiosity and fear were eating me alive. I had to know what was down there. The sounds were getting louder, more disturbing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was happening beneath me. So, I waited until late, when the motel was quiet, and I crept down the hall. The basement door was locked as usual, but earlier that day, I had seen the owner put a key in his desk drawer. My hands were shaking when I grabbed it, and my heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. I opened the door slowly, every creak of the hinges sending chills down my spine. The basement was dark and cold. I fumbled for a light switch but couldn't find one. My phone's flashlight would have to do. As I stepped down the stairs, the air got thicker, a strange smell hitting me, like dampness and something else, something rotten. I swallowed hard and kept moving, every step feeling like I was walking deeper into a nightmare. What I found down there made my blood freeze. Clothes, shoes, personal items scattered around. Some of them were torn, dirty, like they had been there for a long time. There were women's jackets, men's shirts, even a small backpack that looked like it belonged to a child. And then I saw the notes, crumpled papers with desperate writing on them. They told stories of people checking into the motel, but never leaving. My stomach turned as I realized what this meant. These weren't just forgotten items. These were things people left behind because they never got out. The owner was keeping people here, killing them. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short gasps, and that's when I heard footsteps above me. I wasn't alone anymore. He had noticed. He was coming for me. I ran up the stairs, my heart in my throat, trying to stay quiet, but my fear betrayed me. My foot caught on something, and I crashed into the wall, the sound echoing through the empty motel. He must have heard because his footsteps quickened, and I knew I was out of time. I reached the top of the stairs just as he appeared at the end of the hallway, his face blank but his eyes filled with something dark. He didn't say anything, just started walking toward me with slow, measured steps. I backed away, trying to think, trying to figure out how to get past him. I couldn't run outside. I had seen the way the doors were bolted. There was only one way out, through him. Desperation took over. When he got close, I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a lamp from the hallway table, and swung it with all my strength. It hit his shoulder, knocking him off balance, but not for long. He lunged at me, and we both fell to the ground, struggling in a mess of arms and legs. I kicked, scratched, did whatever I could to get him off me, but he was strong. Finally, I managed to get free, my body aching from the fight, and I ran. I didn't stop until I was out the door, sprinting down the highway with no shoes, no plan, just the terror driving me forward. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I don't know if he followed me or not, and maybe I'll never know. But I got away that night. I survived. But even now, as I sit in this cheap diner far from that place, I don't feel safe. I'm always looking over my shoulder, waiting to see his face again, because I know deep down he's still out there, and maybe next time I won't be so lucky. I travel a lot for work. Usually, it's just another boring flight, hotel, meeting, repeat. But last week, something happened to me that I can't explain. I don't know if it was real or if I'm losing my mind, but I need to write this down. Maybe someone will believe me. I was in this small town for a business meeting. I checked into a rundown motel because it was close to where I had to be. You know the type. flickering neon sign, strange stains on the carpet, and a front desk clerk who smiles a bit too much. But I didn't care. I just wanted to get some sleep. The room was just as bad as I expected. Dingy walls, a bed that creaked when I sat on it, and a window that wouldn't quite close. But I was exhausted. I had a meeting early the next morning and needed to rest. I tossed my suitcase in the corner, turned off the lights, and crashed on the bed. When I woke up, everything was different. I remember opening my eyes and feeling wrong. The room wasn't the same. It was cleaner, brighter, and the bed didn't creak anymore. I thought maybe I was dreaming, but the feeling was too real. I reached for my phone, hoping to check the time and figure out what was going on. The phone was dead. That's when I realized this wasn't the same motel. My suitcase was next to me, the same one I brought, but the room? Totally different. I jumped out of bed and went to the window. When I looked outside, my stomach dropped. I didn't recognize anything. I wasn't in the small town where I checked in last night. I was in some busy city, tall buildings, people everywhere, but I had no idea where. I tried to calm down. Maybe I had gone out last night and just didn't remember. Maybe I got too drunk. But that didn't make sense. I hadn't left the room at all. I didn't even have a drink. I tried to call the front desk using the room phone, but the line was dead. Now I was panicking. I threw on my clothes, grabbed my things, and hurried outside. The streets were packed with people, but I didn't recognize the place. I found a convenience store and asked the guy behind the counter, "Where am I?" He looked at me like I was crazy and told me the name of a city that was 5 hours away from where I checked in. How did I get here? I muttered to myself. I walked down the street trying to get a cab, but the drivers either ignored me or told me they weren't going anywhere near where I needed to go. That's when I saw them, the motel staff, the same clerk from last night standing on the corner watching me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw another one of them across the street. They were all there, staring. My heart started racing. Why were they following me? How did they get here? I didn't stop to ask. I started walking faster, almost running, looking over my shoulder every few minutes. Every time I turned a corner, there they were, always watching, never speaking. I needed help, so I went into a cafe and asked if anyone could call me a cab. But when I looked around, the people inside were just staring at me. No one said a word. I backed out, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. Every person I passed on the street seemed to know something I didn't, their eyes following me with cold indifference. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I spotted one of the motel staff following me and ran straight at him. "What's going on? Why are you following me?" I demanded. He just smiled, that same creepy smile he had when I first checked in. "You'll be back soon," he said calmly, as if that was supposed to make sense. It's always the same. "What are you talking about? How did I get here?" I shouted, but he didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, shaking, unsure of what was real anymore. I didn't sleep for days after that. I wandered the city, trying to find a way out, but no matter what I did, I couldn't escape. Every time I thought I'd lost them, the motel staff would show up again, just out of reach, just enough to remind me they were still there. And then, just when I thought I was going to lose my mind, I woke up. I was back in the original motel, the one where I had checked in on the first night. My phone was fully charged, and it was the morning of my meeting, like nothing had happened. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, but everything seemed normal. The room was the same dingy place I remembered, the creaky bed, the cracked window. I tried to tell myself it had been a dream, maybe a hallucination from stress or lack of sleep. But when I went to check out, the same clerk was there at the front desk, smiling at me again. And this time, I noticed something I hadn't before, a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt. As I handed him my room key, he glanced at the walkie-talkie and whispered something into it. I didn't ask what he said. I didn't want to know. I grabbed my suitcase and left as fast as I could. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're still watching me. Every time I check into a hotel or walk through a crowded street, I catch a glimpse of them. Just for a second, but it's enough. I don't know if I'll ever really escape. Last month, my husband and I took a trip. We hadn't been on vacation in a while, and we needed a break from everything. The drive was long, much longer than we thought. By the time we pulled into the motel parking lot, it was already dark. We were both exhausted and didn't want to drive anymore. The place looked normal enough. A simple building, a few cars in the lot, and a glowing vacancy sign hanging in the window. At the front desk, the receptionist barely spoke. He handed us a key without asking many questions. His eyes seemed flat, no real expression on his face. It was a little weird, but we were tired and didn't think too much about it. After getting our key, we walked down the quiet hall to our room. The silence in the motel felt strange, almost like there wasn't anyone else staying there. But there were. We passed by a couple of other guests in the hallway. They didn't look at us, just walked past with the same blank expression as the receptionist. I felt something crawl up my spine, but I told myself it was just late and people were probably just tired like us. The room was clean, everything was in its place, almost too perfect. The bed was neatly made, not a wrinkle in sight. I thought it was strange, but I didn't say anything to my husband. We dropped our bags and fell asleep quickly, too tired to think about anything else. The next morning, something was left outside our door. It was a piece of paper with a list, a schedule, really. It told us when breakfast was, when lunch and dinner were served, and even when we should rest. I laughed at it at first, thinking it was some kind of weird motel service. But when we went to the lobby for breakfast, things got even stranger. All the other guests were there, sitting in rows at the tables, eating in complete silence. They took bites at the same time, chewed at the same pace, and no one spoke a word. My husband and I exchanged glances, unsure what to make of it. I whispered to him that we should just eat quickly and leave, but he shrugged, saying it was probably some strict rule the motel had. We sat down, and I tried to eat, but the whole atmosphere made me uncomfortable. The guests didn't even look at each other, only stared straight ahead or down at their plates. My husband didn't seem as bothered as I was, and I wondered if I was just overreacting. The second day, the schedule appeared again, slipped under our door. This time, it didn't feel funny. It felt controlling. The hours on the paper were rigid, and there was a section labeled Group Meeting. My husband brushed it off, saying the motel was just trying to keep guests organized. But something about it felt wrong, forced, like they were trying to make us part of something we didn't understand. We decided to ignore the schedule, but that's when things got worse. We started getting looks from the other guests, not normal looks. These were cold, empty stares. They seemed angry, or maybe just disappointed. One woman bumped into me in the hall, then stood there, staring without a word until I stepped away. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I told my husband, but he waved it off, telling me to relax. He said I was imagining things, that I was just tired from the drive and overthinking. I wanted to believe him, but the next day when I passed one of the rooms, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Through a crack in the door, I saw a group of guests sitting in a circle, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. A man stood in the middle, speaking softly to them. I couldn't hear everything he was saying, but I caught a few words, something about belonging and obedience. I backed away, not wanting to be seen, but that image of those blank faces stayed with me. I knew now something bad was happening here. I confronted my husband that night, but he didn't seem to care. In fact, He seemed calmer than ever, like he wasn't bothered at all by what was going on around us. I asked him if he'd noticed how strange the other guests were, how everyone seemed like they were in a trance. He just shrugged and told me it was probably nothing, but I knew better. I started watching him closely, noticing the little changes in his behavior. He was quieter, more distant. He followed the schedule without complaint, like he was slowly becoming one of them. I couldn't take it anymore. I told him we had to leave, but he refused. He said the place was fine, and we just needed to relax and go along with it. His words terrified me. It wasn't him speaking anymore. It was like the motel had already gotten to him. That night, I packed my bag. I didn't care if he stayed or not. I had to get out. But as I made my way to the door, I realized I wasn't alone. The other guests were in the hallway, standing perfectly still, watching me. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to slip past them, but their eyes followed me, cold and empty. I ran. I didn't stop to look back. The staff, the guests, they were everywhere, moving in strange, synchronized patterns like they were part of some twisted machine. I could hear footsteps behind me as I reached the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock, and just as I pulled the door open, I felt a hand grab my arm. The last thing I remember is the receptionist's blank face, staring at me with those dead eyes pulling me back inside. I never saw the outside world again. I've always been a fan of traveling alone. It's cheaper, quieter, and I get to choose where I go and how long I stay. This time, I decided to explore a small town in the middle of nowhere. I needed a break from everything, and this place seemed perfect. Isolated, quiet, with only a handful of people around. Just me and the road. When I arrived, it was already late. I hadn't planned on stopping, but after hours of driving, I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I spotted a cheap-looking motel, the kind that you drive past and forget in a second. It had a flickering neon sign that read, "Vacancy." It was enough for me. Inside, the motel lobby was old and dusty. The clerk, an older man with tired eyes, barely looked up from his magazine when I walked in. He handed me the keys without much conversation, just mumbling something about room 12 into the hall. I didn't care. I was tired and just wanted to sleep. The room was basic. A bed, a small TV, and a bathroom that probably hadn't seen a deep clean in years. But it was cheap, and that's what mattered. After settling in, I lay on the bed, letting the silence of the night wash over me. My eyelids were heavy, and sleep was just about to take me when I heard it. A soft, distant sound. Crying. At first, I thought it was my imagination, maybe the wind outside or the creaks of an old building, but the more I listened, the clearer it became. It was definitely crying. It was coming from the room next door. At first, I ignored it, thinking maybe it was a couple having a fight, or maybe someone was watching TV too loud. But the crying continued, and it got louder. It was strange, desperate, like whoever it was had been crying for hours. Something in the sound made my skin crawl. I told myself it wasn't my business, but after another 10 minutes of listening to that heartbreaking noise, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to check it out. What if someone was hurt? I got up, walked down the hall, and stood in front of the door to the room next to mine. Room 11. I knocked softly, hoping whoever was inside would answer. No response. The crying stopped abruptly, like someone had hit pause. It was too quiet. I knocked again, this time louder. Still nothing. After a few seconds, I turned the doorknob, and to my surprise, it was unlocked. I hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The room was empty. The bed was perfectly made, like no one had been there for days. There were no bags, no clothes, nothing. Just an empty room, still and silent. I stood there for a moment, confused. Where was the crying coming from? The room was so clean it felt like it hadn't been touched. Maybe I had imagined it. But no, I couldn't have. The crying was so real, so raw. I left the room, shutting the door behind me, and went back to my own room, trying to shake the feeling of unease that crept up my spine. Back in my room, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts kept circling back to the crying and the empty room. Something wasn't right. I decided to go ask the motel clerk if someone had been staying in room 11. Maybe there was some logical explanation. When I got to the front desk, the clerk didn't seem surprised to see me. I asked him about the room next door, about the crying, and if someone was staying there. He gave me a strange look, hesitating before answering. He finally said that room 11 had been empty for a few days. The last guest, well, he stopped, looking even more uncomfortable. He eventually admitted that the last person who stayed in that room had been found dead. The words hit me hard. Dead? How? He didn't give me details, just said it was under strange circumstances. The police were involved, but they didn't think it was anything more than an accident. After that, no one wanted to stay in the room. I returned to my room, feeling unsettled. My mind raced with questions. Was the crying real, or was it just my imagination playing tricks on me after hearing the clerk's story? I lay down, but sleep was impossible. The night felt heavier now, like the air itself was pressing down on me. That's when I heard it again. The crying. But this time, it was different. It wasn't coming from the room next door anymore. It was coming from my walls. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. The crying was faint at first, but grew louder, more desperate, like it was moving closer. It felt like it was right beside me. I looked around the room, eyes darting to every corner, but there was nothing. I was frozen, unable to move. Then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There were faint marks on the floor, like something had been dragged. I hadn't seen them before, but they were there, leading to the wall. My mind raced. What if the person who died? What if it wasn't an accident? What if they were dragged into the walls, hidden away? Panic gripped me. I needed to get out. I grabbed my things and rushed to the door, but it wouldn't open. I yanked the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The crying grew louder, echoing through the room. I could hear footsteps now, slow and heavy, just outside my door. Someone was there. I pressed my ear against the door, and the footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, a soft knock. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would burst. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by a cold, dead silence. I realized, with a sickening dread, that whatever happened to the person in room 11 was about to happen to me. I've always wanted to do a solo road trip. Something about the open road, no schedule, no one to answer to. It felt freeing. So last week, I finally did it. I packed my bags and drove, aiming to stop at a quiet little town along the way. By the time I arrived at this old motel, it was way past midnight. The neon sign flickered, the vacancy light buzzing faintly. The place was run down, like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. But I was exhausted, and the thought of searching for another place wasn't appealing. Plus, I told myself, it's just one night. The lobby smelled like mildew, and the front desk clerk barely looked up when I checked in. His eyes were bloodshot, and his face, bam. He handed me the key, mumbled something I couldn't catch, and disappeared into the back room. I shrugged it off. I just needed sleep. My room was down a long, dimly lit hallway. The carpet was sticky under my shoes, and the walls were thin. I could hear a TV playing somewhere, muffled voices, but no real people around. When I opened the door to my room, a wave of stale air hit me. The place smelled like it had been shut for years. The bedspread was old, faded. The lamp in the corner flickered a bit before settling. I checked the lock on the door and pushed a chair in front of it just to be safe. I was already uneasy, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. I settled in bed, trying to relax. But something felt wrong. The room was too quiet. I could still hear faint sounds from other rooms, but they were distant, almost like they were echoing from far away. The lights flickered again. I was suddenly aware of the sound of my own breathing, the creak of the old bed as I shifted. I felt watched, even though I was alone. I got up to check the windows. They were locked, curtains drawn. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, just tired from the long drive. Then, around 2 a.m., I heard it. A knock at the door. At first, I thought I imagined it. It was soft, almost polite. But then it came again, louder this time. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze. Who would be knocking at this hour? A voice followed, muffled through the door. "It's the motel staff. There's an issue with your room. I need to come in." Everything in me screamed not to open the door. Something was off. My hand shook as I reached for my phone. I decided to call the front desk, just to make sure. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. No one picked up. I hung up and tried again. Still nothing. I started to feel cold, like the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. That's when I looked up the motel on my phone. There's no night staff here. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The knocking got louder, more aggressive. The man's voice returned, but it sounded different now, angrier. "Open up, ma'am. This is serious." Panic washed over me. I switched off the lights and crawled to the corner of the room, hoping the darkness would hide me. I held my breath. The knocking stopped, but then I heard footsteps, slow, heavy. They moved back and forth outside my door. It felt like hours passed as I listened to those footsteps, waiting for him to leave. But he didn't. Every now and then he would stop in front of my door like he was waiting for me to make a sound. I checked my phone again. No signal. I couldn't call anyone. My mind raced. I thought about escaping through the window, but what if he was waiting for that? The footsteps moved to the room next to mine, and I heard more knocking. He was checking the other doors, maybe trying to find someone else. My stomach churned with fear. I didn't know how much longer I could stay quiet. Then it went silent. No more footsteps. No more knocking. I waited, not daring to move. Maybe he left. Maybe he thought I wasn't in the room after all. Slowly, I crawled toward the door, pressing my ear against it to listen. Nothing. Maybe it was over. That's when the window shattered. I spun around, and through the darkness, I saw the outline of a man outside the window. He had something in his hand, smashing the glass, trying to get in. I scrambled to find something, anything to defend myself. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely think straight. The chair I had propped against the door now felt useless. I grabbed the bedside lamp and stood there, paralyzed, as the glass rained down. The figure outside was pulling at the broken frame, trying to fit through the opening. I could see his hand reach inside, feeling for the latch. I backed away, gripping the lamp, ready to swing if he got through. But my legs felt like they were made of lead, and I wasn't sure if I could move fast enough. The last thing I remember was the sound of the door creaking. He was getting in from somewhere, and then nothing. I don't know what happened next. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe I ran, but I'm alive, typing this. I got out, I think. Though sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear knocking. It sounds so much like that knock from the motel, like he's still out there, waiting. We had been driving all day. Me, Alex, Jen, and Ryan were dead tired, but we didn't want to stop just anywhere. We were miles from any major town, and the roads were getting darker. The GPS kept telling us there was a motel nearby, but it felt like we'd been driving forever. When we finally saw the faded sign for the Ridgeway Motel, I felt a strange chill. The place looked run down, the kind of spot you'd stop at if you had no other choice. We all exchanged glances but agreed we needed rest more than comfort. We parked, got out, and checked in without much thought. I remember we all signed the register, me, Jen, and Alex. Ryan, he went to grab a soda from the vending machine while we were talking to the woman at the front desk. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew, and the lights buzzed dimly. We got 2 rooms, one for me and Alex, one for Jen and Ryan. The whole time, I felt something wasn't quite right, but I told myself it was just the exhaustion. We all headed up to our rooms, collapsing into bed almost immediately. That night, I didn't sleep well. The walls were thin, and every creak and shuffle from the room next to ours made me jump. Alex was out cold, snoring softly, but I kept waking up, my head buzzing with a sense of unease I couldn't shake. Eventually, I drifted off for a few hours, but when I woke up again, it was still dark. Something felt wrong. I got up and knocked on the door connecting our room to Ryan and Jen's. No answer. I knocked louder. Then, Alex stirred behind me. "What's up?" he mumbled. I told him I was checking on Ryan and Jen because it was strange they weren't responding. Alex got up, we tried the door again, and it finally swung open. The bed was made. Jen was there, still asleep, but Ryan was gone. "Ryan?" I called out, loud enough that it woke Jen up. She blinked, confused. "Where's Ryan?" she asked, but neither of us had an answer. We checked the bathroom. Empty. Alex and I stepped outside, walking to the front desk. The woman who checked us in the night before was sitting there, looking bored and uninterested. "Excuse me," I said. "Our friend, Ryan, he's missing. Did you see him leave?" She looked up at me, her face blank, and shook her head. "You only checked in 3 people," she bled. Her words hit me like a brick. "No, there were 4 of us. Ryan, tall, dark hair. He went to the vending machine when we checked in. You must have seen him," I insisted, my voice rising in panic. She shrugged, repeating, "There were only 3 names on the register." I started to argue, but Alex pulled me aside. He looked freaked out too. "This is messed up," he muttered. We went back to the room, trying to calm Jen down, but as soon as we told her what the front desk said, her face turned white. She started pacing, running her hands through her hair, trying to remember every little detail from the night before. "Maybe he just left?" Alex suggested, but none of us believed that. Ryan wouldn't leave without his phone or his wallet. His stuff was gone. Jen swore he'd been in bed when she fell asleep, but now it was like he had never been there at all. No luggage, no clothes, nothing. The more we talked about it, the stranger everything seemed. Did Ryan even come up to the room with us? Well, was I sure I saw him at the vending machine? My memory felt fuzzy, like the details were slipping away the more I tried to think about them. Alex and Jen were getting more tense by the minute. Every small thing set them off, and we started snapping at each other. Alex accused Jen of not paying attention, and Jen shot back, saying maybe Ryan got tired of Alex's attitude and just took off. I stayed quiet, trying to piece things together, but nothing made sense. My head was spinning. After a few hours of arguing, we decided to split up and search the area. Alex took the car and drove around nearby gas stations and stores. Jen and I checked around the motel, but we didn't find anything. By the time we regrouped, it was afternoon, and Alex had nothing to show either. That's when I started to really panic. What if something happened to Ryan, and we were just wasting time? The motel staff wasn't helping, and we couldn't call the police without sounding insane. I felt trapped, not knowing what was real and what wasn't. By the evening, I began noticing small things that made me question everything. Alex was acting strange, quieter than usual, and kept his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Jen wouldn't meet my eyes, mumbling something about the vending machine every time I asked if she remembered Ryan being there. And then I found it. Hidden under one of the beds in Jen and Ryan's room was a watch, Ryan's watch. I knew it was his because he never took it off, but it was tucked away like someone didn't want it to be found. I pulled it out, holding it up. Jen looked at me, her face pale, then glanced at Alex. Alex shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. That's when I realized. One of them knew more than they were saying. My heart raced as I tried to process it. Was I next? Was this all some sick game, and I was the last one to figure it out? I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We left the motel at first light, but the questions haunted me long after. What really happened to Ryan? Could I trust Alex and Jen? Or had I imagined everything from the start? Even now, I'm not sure. All I know is that I'll never step foot in a small, empty motel again. I wasn't supposed to end up in a place like this. I thought I had escaped, that he couldn't find me anymore. It had been months of running, looking over my shoulder, never feeling safe. But this time, I drove hours from the city, far enough that even my mind could rest. I found a small, cheap motel off the highway. It looked quiet, tucked between two tall trees, with barely any other cars around. Perfect. I just needed to sleep for a few hours to feel normal again. The woman at the front desk smiled at me when I checked in. Her smile was wide, almost too wide, but I told myself I was overthinking it. Just tired, I thought. Her eyes lingered on me for a bit longer than they should have, and something about it made me uncomfortable, but I brushed it off. Everything made me uncomfortable these days. I got the room key and went straight to my room. The moment I stepped inside, I locked the door behind me, then double-checked it just in case. It was small, just a bed and a dresser, a tiny TV on the wall, but it didn't matter. This wasn't home. I didn't need comfort. I just needed to stop running. I dropped onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe. He wasn't here. I had outsmarted him. My body relaxed, and I started to believe maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was over. But then something made me sit up. I don't know why I looked out the window. Maybe I was just curious, wanting to see the view, or maybe my brain, always alert, still hadn't let go of the fear. I peeked through the thin curtains, expecting nothing, and then I saw it. The car. It was his car. Old black, with a dent in the back bumper. It was parked right outside my room, like it was waiting for me. My stomach dropped, my hands trembling as I backed away from the window. My mind raced. How did he find me? How did he know I was here? I hadn't told anyone where I was going. No one knew. I tried to tell myself it wasn't his car, that I was just imagining things, but I knew that car too well. I'd seen it parked outside my apartment for weeks, following me wherever I went. He was here. He was always here. I grabbed my phone, hands shaking, and tried to call someone, anyone. No signal, of course. The reception out here was terrible, and there was no Wi-Fi. Panic started creeping up my throat, tightening my chest. I couldn't stay here. I had to leave, now. But when I opened the door, I hesitated. The motel parking lot was empty except for that car. If I ran, where would I go? The highway was long, and there was nothing for miles. And the woman at the front desk, something about her felt off. Maybe she had told him I was here. Maybe they were working together. I slammed the door shut, pacing the small room. What was I going to do? My mind kept replaying the last few months, all the ways he had found me, all the times I had thought I was safe only for him to show up again. Was I losing it? Maybe I was just being paranoid. But that car? My thoughts were interrupted by a sound. Footsteps. Someone was coming down the hallway. They were slow, steady, like they knew exactly where they were going. My heart raced. I pressed my ear to the door, holding my breath. The footsteps stopped right outside my room. I froze. The handle of the door turned slowly, as if whoever was outside was testing to see if it was locked. I backed away, my eyes darting around the room. There was nothing to protect myself with except for a lamp on the bedside table. I grabbed it, holding it tightly in my hands, ready for whatever was coming. The door clicked, opening just a crack, and I raised the lamp, ready to swing. But then I stopped. It wasn't him. It was the woman from the front desk, holding a key in her hand, smiling that same strange smile. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice too calm. "I knocked, but you didn't answer. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." I didn't lower the lamp. Something was wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. Why would she come to my room without being called? Why did she have a key? She stepped closer, her smile still plastered on her face. "He's been looking for you," she said, her voice soft, almost like she was telling me a secret. My blood ran cold. Before I could ask who she meant, she stepped back and closed the door, leaving me alone again. I stood there, frozen, my mind racing. I knew who she was talking about. She had to be talking about him. They were working together. They had to be. I felt sick. My hands shook, and I dropped the lamp on the floor. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. But where would I go? The highway was dark, and I couldn't outrun him. He was already here, and now the motel staff were helping him. I heard more footsteps outside, heavier this time, and then a voice. His voice. He was calling my name, slow and taunting, like he knew I was trapped. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to disappear, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no way out, no escape. The footsteps stopped right outside my door again, and I heard him chuckle, a low, cruel sound. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would all disappear, but I knew better. This was it. He had found me. And this time, there was no running. I didn't think I'd be staying at a motel that night, but the drive had been longer than expected. The rain was pouring down, and I could barely see a few feet in front of me. I needed to rest. When I saw the neon sign flashing vacancy, I pulled in. It wasn't anything special, just a run-down place on the side of the road, the kind you don't pay attention to unless you're desperate, which I was. The guy at the front desk barely looked up when I walked in, just handed me a key after taking my card. He mumbled something about checkout, but I was too tired to listen. The room smelled musty, and the wallpaper was peeling. The bed looked old, but I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep. I woke up when it was still dark. I didn't know why at first. Maybe a noise? I couldn't be sure. Groggily, I got up to go to the bathroom, but something felt off. I reached for the door, but it didn't open. Confused, I tried harder, twisting the knob and pulling, but it was stuck. That's when I noticed the windows. They were completely covered, boards nailed tightly across them from the outside. My heart started racing. I ran to the door, pulling and yanking as hard as I could, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. Panic set in quickly. I started pounding on the walls, shouting for help. Nothing. I checked my phone. No signal. My eyes scanned the room, and I noticed something odd. There were small holes in the walls like vents, but they were positioned too perfectly, almost like they were there to watch me. When I looked closer, I could see tiny cameras inside. They were watching me. I felt sick. My stomach twisted as I realized this wasn't some accident. Someone had planned this. I turned to the TV, hoping for some news, some distraction. But when it flickered on, all I saw was myself. A live feed of me standing in the room, broadcast straight to the TV. I couldn't breathe. I screamed again, louder this time, desperate for someone to hear me, but the silence outside was crushing. Suddenly, a voice crackled through the room. It wasn't coming from the TV, but from some hidden speaker. Distorted, cold, and unrecognizable, it told me I was part of an experiment. I wasn't sure if I'd heard right, but it repeated itself. An experiment, it said, to test how people react when they're pushed to their limits. I'd be watched, studied, and there was no way out until they were done. I wanted to argue, to shout that they had no right to do this, but the voice didn't respond to me. It just continued, explaining how they'd be controlling every part of my environment, what I ate, when the lights turned on or off, the sounds I'd hear in the walls. They wanted to see how I'd handle fear, isolation, desperation. And then the voice cut out, leaving me in heavy, suffocating silence. At first, I tried to stay calm. There had to be a way out. I grabbed the lamp from the bedside table and swung it at the window, but the glass didn't even crack. I tried the door again, kicking it, throwing my whole weight against it, but it didn't move. The lights flickered, and strange noises began coming from the walls, scratching, tapping, like something was crawling inside. Every time I thought I heard something real, I'd rush to the spot, only to find nothing. They were messing with my mind. Days passed, I think. I lost track of time. They'd bring food, but I never saw anyone. It just appeared while I was sleeping, and it was always weird. Cold soup, half-rotten fruit. I stopped trusting the food, but hunger eventually made me eat it. The lights would randomly turn off, plunging the room into total darkness for hours. I'd sit there, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the next sound or trick they had planned. I barely slept, and when I did, it was shallow, restless. I couldn't think straight anymore. My reflection on the TV became my only company. I talked to it, sometimes convinced that it was watching back, other times just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. The cameras, the TV, the walls, they were all part of the same trap. There was no one outside. I was alone. Or at least that's what I thought until I found the vent. It was small, hidden behind a piece of furniture I hadn't bothered to move before. It looked like it had been recently screwed in, like they didn't want me to find it right away, but now that I had, I knew it was my chance. I wasn't thinking straight, but it didn't matter. It was an exit, a way out of this nightmare. I grabbed a piece of broken wood from the bed and pried the screws loose. The vent cover clattered to the floor. I didn't even think about where it led. I just climbed in, crawling through the narrow space. It was tight, claustrophobic, but I kept going. I had to escape. I had to get out. But as I moved deeper into the vent, I noticed something. It wasn't leading anywhere. It just kept winding, turning in on itself like a maze. My heart sank. I started to panic, moving faster, but the path never changed. I was going in circles. That's when I realized the truth. This wasn't an escape. This was another trap. The voice came back, echoing in the vent. They were watching me, waiting to see how far I'd go, how long I'd fight before I gave up. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the walls. There was no way out. I was halfway through my cross-country trip when I decided to stop at a small motel on the side of the highway. It looked old and forgotten, with a faded sign that flickered above the door. I was so tired, though, I didn't care. I just needed to rest. Inside, the lobby was quiet, except for a man behind the counter. He didn't say much, just asked for my name and handed me a room key. The key had a big white number 13 printed on it. "We give all our guests a number," he said. I thought it was strange, but didn't ask questions. I just wanted to sleep. The room was just as simple as the motels outside. Bare walls, an old TV, and a stiff bed. I threw my bag down and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. That's when I heard voices. The walls were so thin, I could hear the people in the next room talking. They were whispering about the numbers. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught something like, "The numbers. They mean something." My body tensed, but I brushed it off. I was just tired, hearing things. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The motel was too quiet, and I could feel the heaviness in the air. I decided to get some fresh air, maybe find a vending machine for water. As I passed the front desk, I saw a paper on the wall. It was a guest list with all the room numbers. My eyes scanned down the list, and a strange chill ran through me. The rooms below mine, the ones with lower numbers, were empty. I could see the names of guests, but no one seemed to be staying in those rooms now. Something didn't feel right. My mind started racing. Maybe they checked out, I told myself, but the way the names were listed, it felt like they were gone. I quickly went back to my room, locking the door behind me. My room was number 13. If there was a pattern, I was next. I didn't know what to do. I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking it, but the sinking feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. My hands started shaking as I tried to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car, but when I tried to start it, nothing happened. Panic flooded through me. I went back inside to talk to the man at the front desk. "My car won't start," I said, my voice shaky. He looked at me for a moment, not surprised at all. "We'll have someone look at it in the morning," he said, almost too calm. It felt like he already knew this would happen. I went back to my room, pacing. I needed to figure out what was going on. The guest in the room next to mine, he was number 12, right before me. I knocked on his door. After a moment, he opened it, just a crack. His eyes were wide, like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him about the numbers, trying to sound calm, but I couldn't hide my fear. He just shook his head and said, "It's not up to us. It's up to him. He decides when it's your turn." That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't waiting to find out what that meant. I had to leave, and I had to do it now. Later that night, when the motel was quiet, I crept to the office. I thought maybe I could find something, anything that would explain this. The door to the office wasn't locked. Inside, I found a box of old papers, and under them, a stack of Polaroid pictures. Each photo was of a guest, with their number written underneath. Most of the photos had the numbers crossed out, but at the top of the pile was a photo of me. My number, 13, was still untouched. My heart pounded in my chest. I dropped the photo and turned to leave, but then I heard footsteps outside the door. Someone was coming. My mind raced. I had no way out except through the front door. I burst out of the office, running as fast as I could, straight toward the parking lot. But standing there, waiting for me, was the motel owner. He stood under the flickering sign, his face calm, almost pleased. "Did you really think you could outrun it?" he asked, his voice smooth, as if he'd been through this 100 times before. I froze, my heart beating so loud I thought it would burst. He reached into his pocket and pulled out my room key, the number 13 glinting in the weak light. "It's just your turn," he said. I backed away, but it was too late. Everything around me felt like it was closing in. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. All I could see was that number on the key, and then everything went black. I don't know if anyone will ever find me. Maybe they'll see the guest list, my name crossed out like the others. Or maybe they won't even notice. I don't know. All I know is that, at that moment, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't escape my number. I wasn't planning to stop, but the rain made it impossible to keep going. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up, and the road ahead had turned into a blur of dark shapes and flickering headlights. I could barely see 5 feet in front of me. My phone had no signal. The GPS was useless, and every passing mile felt like it was taking me deeper into nowhere. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A flickering neon sign that read Motel. I was desperate, so I took the turn and pulled into the gravel lot. The place looked old, worn down, and barely alive, but it was shelter. The rain drummed on the roof of my car as I grabbed my bag and rushed to the front office. The guy behind the counter barely looked up as I checked in. His eyes were dull, his shirt stained, and he gave off a weird vibe, but I was too tired to care. I just needed a room and a bed. Room 7. I found it at the end of a dimly lit hallway, the flickering light above making everything feel even more off. I locked the door behind me, tossed my bag on the chair, and collapsed on the bed without even taking off my shoes. My head hit the pillow, and I was out. Sometime during the night, a loud knock jolted me awake. I sat up confused. The room was pitch black, except for the occasional flash of lightning through the curtains. Another knock. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make my heart race. I stumbled out of bed, my legs heavy from sleep, and opened the door. No one. Just the sound of rain pouring outside. I was about to close the door when I saw it. A small piece of paper, stained with what looked like blood, slipped under the door. I picked it up, and my heart stopped. It said one word: run. I stared at the note, trying to make sense of it. Who left it? Was this some kind of sick joke? My mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. I stepped into the hallway and looked around. All the doors were slightly open, just enough to see the darkness inside the rooms. No lights, no sound. Just an eerie silence that felt heavy, like the air was thicker than it should be. I closed my door, locking it tight, and sat on the edge of the bed, the note still in my hand. My head was spinning. Maybe it was just some prank, I told myself. But the blood. It looked too real. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I tried to sleep, but every creak, every gust of wind made me jump. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, light, almost as if someone was trying not to be heard. They stopped outside my door. I held my breath, listening. My pulse pounded in my ears, and for a moment I thought I was imagining it. Then the footsteps started again, moving away this time, down the hall. I couldn't stay there. Something was wrong with this place. I packed up my things, my hands shaking, as I shoved my clothes back into my bag. Just as I was about to leave, the knocking started again. This time, it was faster, more faster, more urgent. It wasn't just one knock. It was several, hitting the door again and again, like someone was desperate to get in. I froze, gripping the handle of my bag. Whoever was outside wanted me to open the door, but I knew if I did, it wouldn't end well. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could barely think straight. The knocks grew louder, more frantic, and I knew I had to get out. I threw open the door, ready to run, but I stopped dead in my tracks. The motel manager stood there, blocking my way. His eyes were cold, and there was a strange smile on his face. His hands were covered in blood. "Leaving already?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I took a step back, my mind screaming at me to get out, but my body was frozen. I stammered something about needing to go, but he didn't move. Instead, he raised one of his bloodied hands and wiped it on his shirt. "No one leaves once they check in," he said, his smile widening, his teeth sharp under the dim hallway light. I didn't wait to hear more. I pushed past him and ran down the hall, not caring about the footsteps I heard following me. I reached the front door and threw it open, the cold rain slamming into me as I raced to my car. I fumbled with the keys, my fingers slick from the rain, but I finally got the door open. I started the car and floored it, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped out of the lot. My heart was in my throat, and I could barely see through the rain, but I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that place as possible. But as I drove down the empty road, my headlights caught something up ahead. Figures, standing in the middle of the road, barely visible through the rain. I slowed down, my pulse racing, and as I got closer, I saw them clearly. They were standing there, soaked in the rain, watching me. And at the front, holding a bloodied note in his hand, was the motel manager. His smile was the last thing I saw before the storm swallowed me whole. I never thought a vacation could turn into the worst nightmare of my life. It was supposed to be a relaxing escape with my girlfriend Julia. We had booked this luxury motel online. It looked amazing in the photos. Clean, modern, with a beautiful view of the mountains. We were excited for some peace after a stressful year. But from the moment we arrived, something felt off. The staff greeted us with wide, fake smiles. At first, I thought I was just tired from the long drive. The motel looked just like it did in the pictures, but there was a strange tension in the air, something I couldn't quite place. I ignored it, convincing myself that I was just being paranoid. We checked into our room, which was spotless. The bed was large, the sheets crisp, the view from the balcony beautiful. But then, the first thing that bothered me, the door wouldn't lock properly. Every time I tried, it would click but wouldn't fully latch. I called the front desk, and a guy came up, smiled, and said it was nothing to worry about. He left without fixing it. Julia didn't seem concerned, so I brushed it off too. Still, it gnawed at me. The next few days, the feeling of unease grew. The staff seemed too attentive, always watching us. It wasn't just friendly service, it felt like they were waiting for something. They also didn't let us leave the property without a driver. When we asked to explore the nearby town, the receptionist said it was better to stay here, that the drivers knew the area better. I found it strange, but Julia thought it was just part of the service. She kept saying I was overthinking. One night, something truly disturbing happened. We met another couple during dinner, a man and a woman, both friendly and talkative. We had drinks together and made plans to meet up the next day. But when we went looking for them, they were gone. Their room was empty, their bags gone. When I asked the hotel manager about them, he just smiled and said they checked out early, which didn't make sense. We saw them laughing and joking the night before. Julia started getting nervous too, but we were trapped. No car, no easy way out. The day after that, everything became clear. We were walking around the property when I noticed a door near the back marked "Staff Only." Something about it drew me in. I don't know why, but I convinced Julia to sneak inside with me. It was a narrow hallway that led to several locked rooms. I managed to crack one open with a small tool from my keychain. Inside, I found boxes. Not just any boxes. Inside were clothes, IDs, and passports. Things that clearly didn't belong to the motel. That's when we realized this wasn't a regular place. This was a front for something much darker. Human trafficking. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My heart pounded, my head spun. Julia looked at me with wide eyes, shaking her head, but there was no doubt now. We were in danger. We ran back to our room, trying to stay calm. I dialed the local police, but the line cut off after the first ring. The motel's phones weren't working, or worse, they were controlled. I grabbed Julia's hand and said we had to leave. I didn't care how, we just had to get out. But every exit was blocked by the staff, smiling, pretending like nothing was wrong. I asked for a car to leave, but the driver said they could only take us to approved places. There was no escape. The more we pushed, the more their fake friendliness started to slip. The stares became colder. I realized they were onto us. That night, I barely slept. Julia was shaking, clinging to my arm, but we knew we couldn't stay any longer. At dawn, we made our move. We packed light, leaving most of our things behind, and snuck out the window. The plan was to make it to the woods behind the motel and hike to safety. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all we had. Halfway through, they caught us. The manager himself, along with 2 staff members, cornered us in one of the back hallways. They didn't speak, but their eyes said everything. This was it. I pushed Julia toward a door, screaming for her to run while I tried to hold them off. One of the men grabbed me, and we struggled. I barely managed to break free by hitting him with a loose pipe I found. My hand was bleeding, but I didn't care. I had to find Julia. I stumbled through dark hallways, my vision blurry. Every second I expected one of them to catch me. Finally, I found her near the back entrance, shaking, tears streaming down her face. We bolted into the woods without looking back. We ran for what felt like hours, the sound of footsteps behind us growing louder. They were chasing us. My chest burned, my legs felt like they would give out, but I couldn't stop. I kept hearing Julia behind me, panting, begging me to not leave her. The woods were dark, and every tree seemed like a shadow moving toward us. Finally, we stopped, hidden behind a large rock. The footsteps were close now, too close. I held Julia tightly, trying to control my breathing. I don't know if they saw us or if they just gave up, but after a while, the footsteps stopped. We haven't stopped running since. Every noise in the woods makes me jump. I don't know if they're still after us or if we've really escaped. We're trying to reach a town, but the more we walk, the less sure I am that we're going in the right direction. Maybe they let us go on purpose, just to play with us. Maybe we were never meant to leave. We had no choice but to stop. The storm had turned violent, rain hammering down so hard that the windshield wipers couldn't keep up. We were lost, somewhere off the highway, and there wasn't a single house or gas station in sight. Finally, we saw it. A flickering neon sign. Motel. It looked old and run down, the kind of place you'd normally avoid, but right then, it was our only option. Inside, the smell of dampness hit me first, followed by a strange quiet. The manager behind the desk barely looked up from his newspaper. His face was pale and worn, as if he hadn't slept in days. He asked if we wanted a room, and we nodded. His voice was flat, no interest at all in us, and the key he slid across the counter was cold to the touch. "Room 6, he said. My wife, Lisa, glanced at me nervously, but I just wanted to get out of the rain. The room wasn't much better than the lobby. Old furniture, thin walls, and a damp smell that reminded me of the inside of a basement. I tried to reassure Lisa, saying we'd be gone by morning, but she didn't seem convinced. The storm wasn't letting up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Still, we were exhausted, and soon we crawled into bed, the rain still beating against the windows. I don't know what time it was when I first heard it. At first I thought it was the wind, the storm playing tricks. But then I realized it wasn't. It was a scream, faint but real. I sat up, straining to listen, and there it was again, louder this time. Someone was crying out, and it was coming from the next room. I told Lisa, but she just pulled the blanket tighter around her. "Maybe it's nothing," she said, though her voice was shaking. But it didn't stop. The screaming got worse, turning into desperate cries for help. It sounded like someone was being hurt. I had to do something. I got out of bed, telling Lisa to stay put. "I'll just check," I said, hoping to calm her, but honestly, I wasn't calm myself. The hallway was dark, just a single dim light at the end. I went to the next room, room 7. I pressed my ear to the door, and the screams were clear now, chilling. But when I tried the doorknob, it wouldn't budge. The room was locked. I ran back to our room, grabbed the phone, and called the front desk. The manager answered after what felt like forever, his voice as flat as before. I told him about the screams, expecting him to rush up, maybe call the police. But all he said was, "There's no one in room 7. "What do you mean? I can hear someone screaming. Someone's in trouble," I said, almost shouting. "That room's been empty for years," he replied, his voice so cold it made me shiver. No one stays there anymore. I hung up, not knowing what to think. Lisa was sitting up in bed, her face pale. What did he say? She asked. He said the room's empty, I replied, my heart racing. But we both heard it, right? She nodded, but her eyes were wide with fear. Let's leave, she whispered. We shouldn't stay here. But I couldn't just leave it alone. What if someone's hurt in there? What if the manager is lying? My mind was spinning with possibilities. Why would he say no one was in that room? And why did he sound so cold? Against Lisa's protests, I decided to check for myself. I grabbed the flashlight from our car, and as quietly as I could, I left the room. The hallway felt longer this time, each step echoing. When I reached room 7, I tried the door again, but it was still locked. I shone the light through the small window. At first, it looked like nothing, just an old, dusty room with broken furniture. But then I saw them. Scratches. Long, deep scratches on the walls, as if someone had tried to claw their way out. My breath caught in my throat. What the hell had happened in there? Just as I was about to turn away, I heard it again, the scream. But this time, it wasn't coming from the room. It was behind me. I spun around, shining the flashlight down the hallway. Nothing. Just the dim light and the old walls. But the scream, it had been so close. My heart pounded as I backed away from the door, almost running back to our room. Lisa was already dressed, ready to leave. What happened? She asked, her voice panicked. We're getting out of here, I said, grabbing our things. I didn't care anymore what the manager had said. Something was wrong with this place, and we had to leave. We rushed to the car, the rain still pouring, and drove away as fast as we could. But even as we sped down the empty road, my mind kept replaying those screams, the scratches on the walls, the manager's cold voice. Hours later, when the storm had finally passed and we were far from the motel, I realized something. The screams, they hadn't stopped. They were still there, echoing in my head, getting louder. Lisa was asleep beside me, unaware. But for me, they weren't fading. I haven't slept since that night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear them. Those screams. I don't know if they were real or if I imagined them, but they've followed me, and I can't make them stop. And now, I wonder if they ever will. I didn't know why I had picked that motel. It looked like the kind of place people forget. Faded sign, peeling paint, flickering neon lights outside. Maybe that's why. I didn't want to be found. My sales were down, money was tight, and I just needed to disappear for a while. This trip wasn't working out like I'd planned, so I thought maybe some quiet would help clear my head. I checked in. The guy at the front desk barely looked at me, like he'd seen too many people who didn't want to talk. I liked that. I was tired of talking, of explaining. My room was small, musty. The bedspread looked old, and the single lamp in the corner flickered when I switched it on. I didn't care. I just wanted to sleep, but I couldn't. Something was bothering me. Something about the room. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't say why. It was a small thing, like when you think you've forgotten something but you're not sure what. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just exhausted. After all, I hadn't eaten since lunch, and my head was pounding. I sat down on the edge of the bed, feeling like I had to do something before I could rest. I dropped my keys and heard them clink under the bed. Cursing, I got down on my knees to grab them. That's when I saw it. A crumpled piece of paper, right next to my keys. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was trash from the last guest, but I picked it up anyway. It had my name on it. That was weird, right? I smoothed it out, my hands already shaking, for some reason I couldn't explain. The paper was old, yellowing at the edges. My name was written in big letters at the top, and under it was a message. I almost didn't want to read it, but I couldn't stop myself. You will die tonight. I stared at the words for a long time, my brain refusing to make sense of them. This had to be a joke. Someone was messing with me. But how did they know my name? My thoughts spun, trying to figure out who could have left this here. Was it the guy at the front desk? Maybe he was playing a prank, trying to scare the guests. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, I didn't. I crumpled the note back up and threw it away, telling myself I was being stupid. Still, the feeling of unease grew. I looked at the door, thinking I'd leave just to clear my head. That's when I noticed the first problem. The door wouldn't open. I twisted the handle again and again, but it wouldn't budge. The lock was stuck, or maybe jammed. I went to the window. It was sealed shut. I hadn't noticed that before. Panic crept in. I tried to calm myself, saying it was just a coincidence. Maybe the door was broken. Maybe the windows had been shut for a long time. I grabbed the phone on the nightstand, but it was dead. No dial tone. I looked around the room, feeling trapped. That's when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway, slow and heavy. They echoed through the walls, getting closer with each step. My heart raced as I realized the footsteps were stopping, right outside my door. I held my breath, waiting for the knock, but none came. Instead, the footsteps just stood there, waiting. I backed away, my mind racing. Was it someone trying to scare me? Did they know I was here? I remembered the note, and my stomach twisted in knots. Was this how it was supposed to happen? Was I going to die tonight, just like the paper said? I grabbed the note from the trash and unfolded it again, hoping I had imagined it all. But now, the note had more words. It described the footsteps. It said I was reading it right now. My blood ran cold. This wasn't possible. How could the note change? I wanted to scream, to break something, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place. The footsteps started again, pacing back and forth outside the door. I needed to protect myself, but what could I do? I grabbed the lamp, yanking the cord from the wall, and held it like a weapon. My hands were slick with sweat, and my legs shook as I backed into the corner of the room. Every sound made my heart jump. Was this all in my head? Maybe I was losing it. Maybe everything, the note, the footsteps, the trap door, was just my imagination. I hadn't been sleeping well, hadn't been eating right. I tried to convince myself that I was just tired, that I'd wake up tomorrow and everything would be fine. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside my door again. The silence was worse than the noise. My heart pounded in my ears. I listened closely, waiting for something, anything to happen. Then I heard the door handle turn, slowly, like someone was trying not to make a sound. My breath caught in my throat. I held the lamp tighter, knowing it wouldn't help, but unable to let it go. The handle stopped turning. I stared at the door, waiting for it to open, but nothing happened. Seconds stretched into minutes, or maybe hours. I couldn't tell anymore. I felt trapped in time, locked in that room with the silence pressing down on me. Then, the door creaked, just a little. I held my breath again, waiting for it to open all the way. It never did. And that's when I realized whoever was out there wasn't trying to get in. They were waiting for me to come out. I know I shouldn't have accepted the ride. That's what everyone's going to say. But I was tired, really tired. My feet hurt, and the road seemed endless. It was getting dark, and the cars passing me were less and less frequent. So, when an old man in a beat-up car pulled up and asked if I needed a ride, I hesitated but nodded. He smiled, said he knew a place where I could rest for the night. A motel, he said, not too far from here. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I didn't think much of it. We drove in silence most of the way. He didn't talk much, and honestly, I was too tired to care. After a while, the car slowed down, and I saw the motel. It was small, kind of run down, but I wasn't expecting luxury. The old man handed me a key, said I could have a room for free, and then drove off before I could even thank him. I remember thinking that was odd, but I was just grateful to be out of the cold. The lobby was empty, no receptionist, no guests. I shrugged it off. It was late, maybe everyone was already asleep. My room was at the end of the hall. The door creaked when I opened it, the air inside stale like it hadn't been used in a while. The bed looked clean enough, though, and all I wanted was sleep. But as I lay there, trying to drift off, I started hearing noises. It was faint at first, like whispers behind the walls. I told myself it was just the old pipes or something. Motels like this are old. They make weird sounds. I ignored it. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I fell asleep. I don't know how long I was out before I woke up, but when I did, I couldn't breathe. It was freezing. My body was heavy, stiff. I opened my eyes and realized I wasn't in bed. I was in a bathtub, full of ice. Panic hit me like a truck. I tried to move, but my arms were too numb. I was naked, submerged in ice, and my brain couldn't make sense of it. Then I saw it. A note. It was taped to the side of the tub. Don't move. Don't scream. Don't call for help. If you want to live, stay still. I stared at the note, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. What the hell was happening? I tried to move my legs, and that's when I felt it. A sharp pain in my back, like something was missing. No. I didn't want to believe it, but I had to know. Slowly, I reached behind me, feeling the tender skin near my lower back. The pain shot through me, and then I felt it. A line, a cut, a stitched-up wound, my kidney. It was gone. I don't know how long I stayed there, frozen in more ways than one, trying to process it. My mind kept spinning in circles. Who did this to me? Why? The note. It said not to move, but what was I supposed to do? Wait to die in this tub? I needed to think, but my head was foggy, and my body was getting weaker by the minute. I remembered reading stories about people waking up like this, missing organs, but I never thought it could happen to me. I wasn't sure how much time I had left before something went wrong. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside the door. They were slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing, waiting for me to make a move. My heart stopped. Was it the person who did this to me? Were they waiting to see if I'd break the rules, get out of the tub, scream for help? My breath caught in my throat as I listened. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. My body wanted to scream, to cry out, but I couldn't. I didn't know what would happen if I made any noise. I wasn't sure if anyone else was in this motel. It was too risky. I tried to focus on breathing, in and out, just like the doctors tell you when you're panicking. But it was hard. The ice numbed my skin, but I could still feel the pain inside me, that hollow space where my kidney used to be. The footsteps returned. I could hear them again, moving back and forth. Was this person guarding the door? Were they waiting for something? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every little sound made my heart skip. I needed to make a decision. Stay in the tub and hope they leave me alone, or make a break for it. My body felt so weak, though, like every bit of strength had been drained out of me. I couldn't tell if I'd even make it to the door. Then I heard it. The doorknob. It turned. My stomach dropped. Whoever was outside, they were coming in. My eyes locked on the door, waiting for it to open. But it didn't. The handle stopped turning, and the footsteps faded away again. I didn't move. I couldn't move. My mind was screaming at me to run, to do something, but my body wasn't listening. I don't know how long I stayed in that tub, shivering, waiting for something to happen. Eventually, I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore, but I didn't dare to get up. The note's warning was clear. I didn't know who left it or what they were capable of, but I wasn't going to take any chances. My vision was starting to blur, my eyelids heavy. I thought I heard the door creak open, or maybe I imagined it. I'm not sure, but that was the last thing I remember before everything went black. I don't know if I'll ever wake up. We hadn't planned to stay there. It was just one of those days when the road seemed endless, and we were all too tired to keep driving. My wife, kids, and I had been on the road for hours, heading toward a small town in the mountains for a vacation. The GPS had taken us off the main highway hours ago, and I figured we'd hit another rest stop soon, but the road just stretched on, empty, with no lights, no signs of life. By the time we spotted the motel, we were exhausted. The place was a wreck, faded paint, a crooked sign that buzzed when it lit up like it was struggling to stay on. But we were too tired to care. I parked the car and we checked in, my wife giving me a look like she knew something wasn't right. But we were too worn out to argue. The receptionist barely spoke. He gave us the key and pointed down the hallway. His smile looked forced, like it hurt him to even try. The room smelled like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. The bedspreads were old, the carpet stained. My kids wrinkled their noses, but we all thought just one night. We fell asleep fast, barely saying a word. Morning came, and something was wrong. I pulled back the curtain, expecting to see the cars we saw last night in the parking lot. There were none. Ours was the only one left. My stomach churned as I told myself it didn't mean anything. People check out early, right? I let it go. At breakfast, my wife whispered, asking me if I noticed how quiet the place was. It was true. The halls were empty, no staff, no guests. It was like we were the only ones left in the building. When I asked the receptionist about the other guests, he just stared at me. They all left, he said, his eyes flat, his tone dull. Something in his expression made me uncomfortable, like he was hiding something. I decided we'd leave as soon as we could. Back in the room, I grabbed my bag to pack up, but when I reached for the car keys, they weren't there. I searched the whole room, turning everything upside down, but the keys were gone. Panic shot through me. My wife joined in, frantic now, and even the kids sensed something was off. I stormed back to the front desk, demanding answers. The receptionist, same dull look in his eyes, shrugged. Maybe you lost them, he said. I knew I hadn't lost them. I always kept them in the same place. Something was wrong. I stormed past him, heading to the manager's office. I don't know what I expected to find, but what I saw made my blood run cold. There on the wall were dozens of sets of car keys. Some of them were rusted over, old. Others looked new, like they'd just been taken. Among them, hanging on the lowest hook, were mine. That's when I knew we were in danger. I rushed back to the room, breathless, and told my wife we had to leave, now, but we couldn't drive. I grabbed what little we could carry, told the kids to be quiet, and we snuck out the back door. The plan was to head for the main road, maybe flag down a car. But as soon as we stepped out, I realized we weren't alone. The motel staff, the receptionist, the housekeeper, even the manager, stood in the parking lot watching us. They didn't move, didn't call out, just stood there, staring. For a second, I thought maybe we were being paranoid. But then they started walking toward us slowly, like they had all the time in the world. We ran. My wife grabbed the kids' hands, and we bolted through the trees behind the motel. The forest was dense, making it hard to move fast, but we didn't stop. Behind us, I could hear them, their footsteps crunching leaves, breaking twigs, like they were toying with us, letting us think we had a chance. Every now and then, I heard laughter, light, mocking, like they knew this had happened before, that other families had run this same path, and none of them had made it out. I don't know how long we ran. Time felt slippery, like it wasn't real anymore. My legs ached, my chest burned, but we couldn't stop. Every time I looked back, I saw shadows moving between the trees, getting closer. The kids were crying now, terrified, and my wife was out of breath, begging me to do something, but I didn't know what to do. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the road. Just ahead, through the trees, headlights from a distant car flickered like a promise of safety. "We're almost there," I gasped, trying to keep the kids moving. But just as I thought we might make it, our youngest tripped. He fell hard, twisting his ankle, and cried out in pain. I stopped. My wife kept running for a few more steps before she realized what happened. I turned back, scooping up my son, trying to move faster, but I could feel it. We weren't going to make it. The last thing I saw before I turned back to face the motel was the receptionist. He stood at the edge of the trees, smiling that same forced smile. It was like he knew how this story ended. For a second, I thought about what we could have done differently. Maybe if we hadn't stopped, if I hadn't lost the keys, if I'd just listened to my gut. But it was too late now. I don't know if we'll ever get out of here. I woke up in a small motel room, my head pounding like someone had hit me. The light was dim, flickering weakly from an old lamp on the table. I had no idea how I got here. My last memory was nothing. I couldn't remember what I was doing before this. My heart started racing, and I sat up quickly, realizing that something was wrong. My clothes were gone, and I was only wearing a dirty shirt that wasn't even mine. I tried to think, but my mind felt like it was full of fog. Where was I? Why was I here? I stood up, but the room spun for a moment, making me feel dizzy. I grabbed onto the bed to steady myself, noticing that all my belongings were gone. No phone, no wallet, no shoes. I rushed to the door, pulling on the handle, but it didn't budge. It was locked from the outside. Panic started creeping in as I tugged harder, but nothing happened. I tried the window next, sealed shut, no way to open it. The room felt like it was closing in on me. The walls seemed closer than they should be. I started banging on the door, hoping someone would hear me, but the only sound was the echo of my own fist hitting the wood. I was trapped. Forcing myself to calm down, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to breathe. Maybe I could find a way out if I just stayed calm. As I stared at the door, I heard it, a small noise coming from the bathroom. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't noticed it before. It was so quiet, like a soft shuffle. I stood up again, my legs shaking, and walked slowly toward the bathroom. The door was half open, the light inside barely working. I pushed it open, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There was someone else in the room. A figure was sitting on the bathroom floor, slumped against the wall. They were pale, their skin almost gray, and they weren't moving. For a moment, I thought they were dead. But then I saw the slight rise and fall of their chest, breathing, but shallow. I didn't know what to do. I stepped closer, trying to get a better look, but the closer I got, the more unsettled I felt. Their eyes were open, but they didn't seem to see me. I knelt down, careful not to touch them, and spoke quietly. I asked if they were okay, if they needed help, but they didn't respond. Nothing. No words, no movement, just that slow, creepy breathing. I backed away, feeling more scared by the second. Something about them felt wrong. Maybe they were in shock. Maybe they were drugged. I didn't know. All I knew was that they were not acting like a normal person. I went back to the room, pacing nervously. I needed to get out. I banged on the door again, yelling this time, hoping someone would hear me. But there was no response. I was alone. Well, except for the person in the bathroom. I glanced back at the door where the figure was still sitting, silent. Minutes passed, maybe hours. I wasn't sure anymore. The figure in the bathroom hadn't moved, but every time I looked at them, they seemed more off. Their body was stiff, their head tilted slightly to the side in a way that didn't seem natural. I kept telling myself they were just hurt or sick, but my gut said something else. The tension was building. I felt trapped, not just in this room, but in my own skin. My thoughts were racing. Who were they? Why were they here? Why wasn't anyone coming to help? At some point, I lost it. I started slamming myself against the door, trying to break it down. I yelled for help, screamed, but no one came. The person in the bathroom started making noises too, strange, low muttering that I couldn't understand. It sounded like they were talking to someone, but no one else was there. Or maybe they were talking to me? I stopped and listened. The words weren't clear, but the tone was angry, maybe frustrated. I didn't know if they were trying to get my attention or if they were just crazy, but it freaked me out. I needed to get out of here. I looked around for anything I could use to escape. My eyes landed on the mirror above the dresser. I grabbed the edge of it and pulled hard, shattering it. Glass flew everywhere, and I grabbed a large shard, holding it tightly in my hand, my fingers bleeding from the sharp edges. It didn't matter. I needed to protect myself. With the shard in my hand, I approached the bathroom again, more carefully this time. The figure was still there, still muttering under their breath, but now they were moving slightly, rocking back and forth. Their head turned slowly toward me, and for the first time, they made eye contact. My stomach dropped. The eyes were familiar. Too familiar. That's when pieces of my memory started coming back, flashing in my mind like broken film. I remembered driving late at night. I remembered the car losing control, flipping, pain in my chest. I remembered seeing someone else in the car with me. I took a step back, my mind spinning. The person in the bathroom, this pale, silent figure, I knew them. They were me, or at least a part of me, a part of myself I had left behind in that crash. The more I stared, the more I realized it. The clothes they wore, they were mine. The way they looked at me, like they were waiting for me to understand. I dropped the shard of glass, my hands shaking. I wasn't alone in this room, but the person I was trapped with was something I had tried to forget. Or maybe something I had become. I wasn't planning to stay in that motel. It was one of those decisions you make when you're exhausted, and you just don't care anymore. I had been driving for hours, my eyes burning from staring at the highway lines. The small rundown motel on the side of the road looked quiet enough, just a place to sleep. The lobby was dimly lit, with a flickering bulb in the corner. The clerk barely looked up as I walked in, his eyes glued to the small TV on the desk. He was young, maybe in his early 20s, but there was something off about him. He seemed distracted, nervous even, as he handed me the key. "Not many guests tonight," he mumbled, almost to himself. I shrugged it off and took the key, heading to my room. The room itself was nothing special. Faded wallpaper, a small bed, and a single window facing the parking lot. I tossed my bag onto the bed and sat down, relieved to finally rest. But as I sat there in the silence, an uneasy feeling crept in. Maybe it was the empty parking lot, or the clerk's strange behavior. I told myself I was just tired and locked the door, double-checking it before I collapsed on the bed. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the phone was ringing. Groggily, I picked it up, confused by the time. The clock on the nightstand read 11:45 p.m. "Hello?" I said, my voice heavy with sleep. "Ma'am, this is the front desk," a man's voice came through, sounding tense. "You need to lock your door and stay inside. There's a dangerous man staying in the room next to yours." I sat up straight, the fog of sleep quickly fading. "What?" "Please, lock your door now. Don't make any noise. We're handling it, but you need to stay quiet." The line went dead. My heart was racing. I glanced at the door, my stomach tightening with fear. Who was in the next room? Why hadn't the clerk mentioned anything earlier? I stood up and checked the door, even though I had already locked it. My fingers shook as I turned the bolt again and pressed my ear against the wall, trying to hear anything coming from the next room. Silence. I wanted to call the front desk, to ask more, but something about the way the call ended made me hesitate. The voice had been so rushed, almost too urgent, it didn't feel right. I dialed the front desk anyway. The phone rang twice before the clerk picked up. He sounded half asleep. "Front desk," he said, yawning. "Did you just call me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "No," he replied, sounding genuinely confused. "I didn't call anyone. Everything okay?" Cold panic shot through me. If the call didn't come from the front desk, then who warned me? My eyes flickered to the wall separating me from the room next door. Was the person who called watching me? My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I hung up without saying anything else and backed away from the phone. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but part of me needed to know what was happening next door. I tiptoed toward the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The parking lot was empty, except for my car and one other parked a few spaces down. It must belong to the person next door. I didn't hear anything, no footsteps, no voices. But my skin prickled with the feeling that I was being watched. I slowly walked back to the door, listening closely. Then, a soft knock. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't loud, just enough for me to hear it. Knock, knock. I froze. It came from my door, not from the room next to mine. Whoever was out there knew I was inside. My mind flashed back to the call. He knows I'm alone. I backed away from the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. There was no peephole, no way to see who was standing there. The knock came again, louder this time, more demanding. "Ma'am, it's me, from the front desk," the voice said through the door. "You need to come out." It was the same voice from the phone, but now it sounded wrong, too smooth, too practiced. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized he wasn't trying to help me. He was luring me out. I couldn't stay in the room, trapped, but I couldn't open the door either. I needed to think fast. I grabbed my bag and quietly slipped into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My mind raced for options. The window in the bathroom was too small to crawl through, and if I stayed, he'd eventually break in. Then I heard it. The sound of the door handle turning. My blood went cold. He was trying to get in. The door creaked as the lock strained. I could hear his breathing, heavy, impatient. The flimsy motel lock wouldn't hold for long. I pressed my back against the bathroom door, shaking with fear. The door finally gave in with a loud crack. I heard footsteps on the cheap carpet outside the bathroom. He was inside the room now. There was no way out. My pulse roared in my ears as the doorknob to the bathroom slowly turned. I held my breath, every muscle tense, waiting for the inevitable. Then, silence. The knob stopped turning, and I couldn't hear him anymore. The room was quiet again, but the tension didn't leave my body. I stayed in the bathroom, too terrified to move. Was he waiting for me outside the door? Or had he left? I didn't know. And I wasn't sure I'd survive if I found out. I've been on the road for hours. The highway stretched endlessly, the dark sky swallowing everything beyond the beam of my headlights. When I finally saw the flickering vacancy sign of a small, run-down motel, I knew I had to stop. There were no other places around, and I was too tired to keep driving. The motel looked old and forgotten, like it hadn't seen many guests in years, but I didn't care. I just needed a bed. The receptionist barely looked at me when I walked in. He was a thin man, pale and tired. He handed me a room key without saying much. His eyes flicked up once, meeting mine briefly, before he looked back down at the desk. Something felt off, but I ignored it. I wasn't there to make friends, just to sleep. When I opened the door to my room, the smell of stale air hit me. It wasn't clean, but it wasn't the worst I'd seen. I tossed my bag on the bed and sat down. That's when I noticed the message. Carved roughly into the wall next to the bed, the words "Don't stay the night" stood out in deep scratches. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling a strange unease creep up my spine. Who would write something like that? Was it a joke? Maybe someone was messing with the next guest who'd stay here, but something about it made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, but the feeling stuck with me. I should have left. That's the truth. Every part of me told me to pack my stuff and get back in the car, but I didn't. I locked the door instead and decided to sleep. It was late, and I was exhausted. But even after I turned off the lights, I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. The air felt heavy. My breathing was loud in the quiet room. Then I started hearing it. Footsteps. Soft, slow footsteps outside my door. They seemed to move back and forth, stopping right in front of the room. I froze, listening hard, my heart beating fast. I told myself it was another guest, or maybe the receptionist was walking around. But deep down, I didn't believe it. I heard a faint whisper next, so quiet I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination. I waited for it to happen again, but it didn't. My mind started playing tricks on me, making me think someone was outside, listening, waiting. I jumped out of bed, went to the door, and opened it just a crack. There was no one there. The hallway was empty. I went back to bed, but sleep was impossible. I kept hearing things. Soft knocks, the creak of the floorboards, like someone was slowly pacing outside. I don't know when I drifted off, but it must have been late because I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night. That's when I saw it. I was lying in bed, staring at the mirror on the opposite wall, and my reflection wasn't right. It wasn't moving the way I was. I blinked, and my reflection blinked too, but then it smiled. A slow, horrible smile that spread across its face, but I wasn't smiling. I felt a chill run through me as I sat up, staring at the mirror. My reflection stood up too, but not like me. It moved first. That's when I knew it wasn't just a reflection. There was someone else in the room, someone who looked exactly like me. He stepped out of the mirror, that twisted smile still on his face, and started moving towards me. My body froze with fear. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Somehow, I broke free of my shock and bolted toward the door, but he was faster. He blocked the way, standing there with that terrible grin. I didn't think. I just ran to the window, yanked it open, and climbed out into the cold night air. I fell hard onto the gravel outside, but didn't stop. I had to get away. As I ran across the motel parking lot, I glanced back and saw him. He was standing at the window, watching me. But the strangest thing, he didn't move. He just stood there, smiling. I kept running, feeling like I was going crazy. I circled around the motel, trying to find a way back to the main road. But no matter where I went, I could see him, out of the corner of my eye, in the reflections of the windows, standing in the distance. It was like he was everywhere, always watching me, always grinning. By the time the sun started to rise, I was exhausted. I stumbled back to the motel lobby, determined to leave. I didn't care about my things in the room. I just wanted out. The receptionist looked up when I burst through the door, panting, my heart racing. "I need to check out," I said, my voice shaking. He frowned, confused. "You checked out last night." I stared at him, not understanding. "What?" He reached under the desk and pulled out the guest ledger, showing me my own signature. "You signed out, right before midnight. My mind reeled. I had never left. I hadn't signed anything. But there, in black ink, was my name. I backed away slowly, feeling the world tilt around me. I left the motel without saying another word. As I drove away, the receptionist's words echoed in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow it wasn't me who signed that ledger. It was him, my double. And I wondered, what if he was the one still inside the motel, living my life, while I was the one who never truly left?